For up to 30,000 years, the indigenous peoples of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands lived in profound isolation from the rest of humanity. Within this sanctuary, tribes like the Great Andamanese and Sentinelese maintained sustainable hunter-gatherer societies, each speaking languages that existed nowhere else on Earth. While isolated, these communities were not stagnant. The Nicobarese managed localized, peaceful trade networks, exchanging coconuts and ambergris for iron with passing vessels. This era of seclusion ended when the British Empire arrived. Following the 1857 Indian Uprising, colonial officials sought a site for a remote penal colony. As seen on this map, the extreme distance from the mainland effectively turned the entire archipelago into a prison of water. The British arrival triggered a systematic three-front assault on the indigenous way of life, initiating a demographic and cultural collapse. The first front was a territorial stripping of the islands. To build the Kalapani penal colonies, the British began clearing the forests that had sustained native tribes for millennia. These prisons, like the massive Cellular Jail, were designed for absolute solitary confinement. This industrial carceral system was built directly upon stolen tribal land. Clearing old-growth forests for these massive brick structures directly destroyed the traditional hunting territories of groups like the Great Andamanese and Jarawa. Tribal warriors fought back. In 1859, they launched a coordinated assault on the British settlement in what became known as the Battle of Aberdeen. Against British muskets and artillery, the indigenous forces faced immediate military defeat, marking the permanent loss of their ancestral lands to a sprawling carceral state. The second front was the establishment of Andaman homes, where the British attempted to forcibly domesticate and civilize surviving hunter-gatherers. This forced containment was a biological disaster. Without antibodies from mainland pathogens, the confined population had no defense against epidemics of pneumonia, syphilis, and measles. Consequently, the Great Andamanese population plummeted from 3,500 in 1858 to 19 by 1961. By forcing a nomadic, isolated people into these concentrated hubs, the British created an epidemiological trap that decimated the tribes they claimed to be civilizing. The third front was the dismantling of indigenous economic and cultural identity, a process carried out by successive waves of occupiers. British administrators imposed a hyper-legal regime that criminalized the traditional maritime trade of the Nicobarese, choking off their economic independence. This was followed by the Japanese military occupation in 1942. The islands were placed under martial law, and the local inhabitants were subjected to a new era of terror. The Japanese military diverted agriculture to feed their troops, causing mass starvation. Indigenous tribes were displaced and conscripted into forced labor to build fortifications. Amidst this century of relentless pressure, ancient languages like Akakora and Akakari simply vanished as the last surviving elders died out. Between British legal restrictions and Japanese military violence, the indigenous people were severed from both their economic livelihoods and their ancestral voices. Today, the Great Andamanese population has been reduced to just over 40 individuals. They live in state-sponsored settlements, largely reliant on government rations for survival. Their ancestral diets, hunting traditions, and independence have been effectively erased. This specific history illustrates how the mechanisms of imperial development, through territorial clearing, through forced settlement, and strict legal control, can systematically dissolve the survival capacity of a vulnerable culture. The haunting silence of humanity's oldest surviving languages is the final, irreversible consequence of this colonial era.